Hello, this is part 2 of my series on the conspiracy involved in the 1972 shooting of Alabama governor and Democratic presidential candidate George Wallace in 1972. This is part 2 of this series on the Arthur Bremer diary. Arthur Bremer was the supposed or accused assassin of Governor George Wallace that year. Now, most of his diary was published in a January 1973 issue of Harper's Magazine at that time. In this video, I'm strictly going to talk about the diary and my interpretation of it. I don't believe in general it was written by Arthur Bremer. I think it may have been written by one other person or possibly multiple people. Okay, so here we go. Bremer was accused of shooting Wallace in 72. All the entries in the diary that I'm going to talk about, or in the diary at all, are all from 1972, according to Harper's Magazine when they published this. Bremer stalked Wallace in Canada in April of that year. The interesting thing about this is the CIA ran mind control programs for assassins and things of that nature in Canada at that time under the supervision of a psychologist named Dr. Ewan Cameron, who also later was accused of violating people's civil rights and kids' civil rights. He was accused of that in Canada. So that's highly interesting. The diary kind of portrays Bremer, or an interpretation that would be that he would be an impotent nobody, that he talks about a trial in there. This is roughly 113 pages of his diary. It's roughly about half of it. Supposedly the other 148 pages he buried in his backyard in Wisconsin. I do not believe that. I think this was a conspiracy. I do not believe that at all. Keep in mind, if Wallace would have stayed in, McGovern could have won the election in 72 in a three-way race. Wallace was a huge vote splitter for George McGovern. McGovern could have been president in 72. Nixon was not that popular. But Wallace being taken out and not running as a third-party candidate that year really helped Nixon. Throughout the diary, it doesn't really explain how Arthur Bremer had over $1,000 in his possession when he went to New York and Canada. Who financed this guy? Who paid for this guy's travel expenses? He was a college dropout with either no job at the time or literally a lower-end job that never could have afforded all this travel. And also in entries of that time period, he talks a little bit about Wallace, but a lot more about the New York slums and his views of these people and so on and so forth about this low-end part of New York. And in April 13th entry, he's supposedly talking about hotels in New York. Now, what does this guy think he is? Like a hotel critic? I mean, did Arthur Bremer even write this? There's zero in here about conscious aggression, in my opinion, about killing politicians, or very little. He talks a lot in here about pornos and massage parlors and all these kinds of things. Whoever wrote this was trying to make him look insecure and perverted. It looks like a total setup. I believe E. Howard Hunt, or somebody like him, or people like this that were tied to Nixon, wrote this diary. Also in an April 19th entry, he talks about hookers at a massage parlor and how he can't climax sexually. He was a virgin at around 21 years old. Another thing is, how did he afford guns and ammo? He then stalked Nixon in Canada. He talks about theology. How did he afford any of this when it came to travel? In April 21st of that year, he has car issues. He stays in Port Huron, Michigan. He accidentally discharges a gun in a hotel room. The guy barely knew anything about guns. So how could he have methodically planned a presidential candidate assassination attempt? Whoever wrote this tried to make him look dumb and crazy. And in April 22nd, entry. He stalked Nixon in Canada. Much of the diary makes no sense. He talks about sex. Then he's talking more about intellectual things like the liberal anti-war people being a joke. He refers to them as the new establishment. I don't think the guy at the time in his life had the intellectual capacity to write this diary. I think E. Howard Hunt wrote it, or somebody like him wrote this as a favor to Nixon to help set this guy up. Later in the diary, he references Sirhan Sirhan, who was accused of trying to kill Bobby Kennedy in '68. He continues stalking Nixon in Canada. He eats very expensive, which does not add up. He eats in expensive restaurants, expensive hotels. He claims he got by the Secret Service with a gun in an April 23 entry. He acts like he needs attention. He also admits right before the shooting of Wallace that he had less money than before he took the trip. So somebody had to be paying for all this. They had to be setting this up. It's a major yellow flag with crime and especially with political assassinations. He also talks about seeing the film A Clockwork Orange, which may have been based on CIA, MKUltra mind control programs, or some sort of government or private sector mind control programs. Another big yellow and orange flag. Through most of the diary, he talks very little about politicians, including Wallace. On the May 13th entry, he talks crazy, and then he also says he considered George McGovern a victim. How did he know this? That they were setting McGovern up to lose the election. He also talks about a political public execution convention, which is really way out there. As if, what, they were trying to kill these politicians so Nixon could win, or people in the government didn't want certain kinds of Democrats or other people in power. How would he have known any of this? None of this adds up. In an May 13th entry, 2 days before the shooting of Wallace, he stalks Wallace in Kalamazoo, Dearborn, Lansing, and Cadillac, Michigan. He cites Sirhan drinking Tom Collins drinks right before Sirhan supposedly tried to kill RFK. This had to be some sort of a setup by Nixon, the CIA, and the deep state to essentially make this guy into a fall guy so they could get Wallace out of the race. Bremer also failed to kill Wallace in Michigan right around this time. Who was paying Bremer to stalk Wallace essentially all over the country? This guy could have never financed this on his own. The deep state had to be involved. In my next video, I'm going to give my conclusion interpretations on the diary, more about E. Howard Hunt, and about other assassinations such as JFK and RFK. I'm also going to do a video on Trump's nationalism, which I think is really important as an issue right now in the popular and political culture. Once again, thank you for your time.